The first time I said my father's name inside the Pentagon, a 4-star general dropped his coffee. Not spilled it. Dropped it. The ceramic mug hit the polished floor and shattered between his shoes. Every conversation in the conference room stopped. General Marcus Hale stared at me from across the table as though I had just announced there was a bomb beneath his chair. Say that again. His voice was quiet. That somehow made it worse. I swallowed. My father's name was Daniel Mercer. The general's face lost its color. Around us sat officers, analysts, and civilian contractors who had been arguing about security protocols only seconds earlier. Now nobody moved. General Hale pushed himself slowly out of his chair. He was 63, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, and covered in enough ribbons to make everyone else in the room instinctively straighten their backs. But right then, he didn't look powerful. He looked afraid. "Where did you get that name?" I blinked. "Sir." "That name." He stepped closer. "Daniel Mercer. Where did you get it?" "He was my father." The general stared directly into my eyes. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he turned toward the room. "Everybody out." One colonel hesitated. "General, the briefing." "Now." Chairs scraped backward. Folders snapped shut. Within 30 seconds, the room was empty except for General Hale and me. He walked to the door, locked it, then lowered the blinds covering the glass wall. That was when my nervousness became fear. I had come to Washington expecting paperwork. Not this. "My name is Claire Mercer. I was 31 years old and worked as a civilian aerospace systems engineer in Virginia. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been assigned to assist a Defense Department review involving guidance systems from a program developed decades ago. Most of the documents were ancient. Schematics, test records, personnel lists. I hadn't thought much about any of it until I'd found a handwritten notation on one engineering diagram. D. Mercer. My father's initials. So during the briefing, when General Hale asked why I'd flagged the document, I'd told him. My father was Daniel Mercer. He used to draw the same symbol in his notebooks. That sentence had shattered a coffee mug. General Hale crossed the room toward a secure cabinet. He entered a code. Nothing happened. Then he removed a key hanging beneath his uniform shirt. That got my attention. Whatever he was opening wasn't normal office paperwork. The cabinet clicked. Inside were several sealed folders. He pulled out a thick grey file with a red stripe across the front. He placed it on the table between us. Then he looked at me again. "How old are you?" 31. "When were you born?" "November 12, 1994. His jaw tightened. "And Daniel Mercer raised you?" "Until I was 14. "What happened when you were 14? I stared at him. He disappeared. The general's expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition. "My mother said he abandoned us," I continued. "She never liked talking about him." "Did you believe her?" "When you're 14, you believe whatever explanation helps you sleep." General Hale lowered himself into the chair opposite me. "What do you remember about him?" I almost laughed. What kind of question was that? I remember everything. Saturday pancakes. Baseball on television. The ridiculous way Dad sang old rock songs while fixing things in the garage. How he could repair practically anything. How he'd sometimes wake up at 2 in the morning and check every window in the house. How he hated sitting with his back toward restaurant doors. At 14, those things hadn't seemed strange. At 31, they did. "He was an electrical engineer," I said. "At least that's what he told us." General Hale gave a humorless smile. "Daniel wasn't an electrical engineer." My stomach tightened. What was he? The general opened the folder. The first photograph stopped me cold. My father. Younger. Maybe 30. He stood beside a military aircraft wearing a flight suit. On his shoulder was an American flag. I reached toward the photograph. "No." General Hale didn't stop me. "That's him." My voice barely came out. The same crooked smile. The same dark eyes. The same tiny scar beside his chin. But my father had never served in the military. At least, that was what he'd told me. I turned the photograph over. A date had been stamped on the back. 1 year before I was born. Who was he? General Hale looked toward the locked door before answering. Captain Daniel Mercer was part of a compartmented Air Force program. What kind of program? The kind people weren't supposed to know existed. I stared at him. Was he a pilot? One of the best. My hands began trembling. You knew him. Hale leaned back. I flew with him. That sentence hurt more than I expected. This stranger had known a version of my father I'd never been allowed to meet. Then why did he lie to us? Because he was ordered to. By whom? The general didn't answer. Instead, he turned several pages. I saw mission summaries with entire paragraphs blacked out. Photographs. Coordinates. A personnel roster. Then he stopped. The next page had my father's photograph in the upper left corner. Across the center was a red stamp. Killed in action. I stared at the date. August 18, 1993. I looked up. That can't be right. No. I was born in 1994. I know. He raised me until 2009. I know. I pushed the folder away. This is some kind of mistake. General Hale's eyes stayed on mine. I attended Daniel Mercer's memorial service. My breathing stopped. I watched an empty casket receive military honors. He leaned closer. And for 33 years, I believed my friend died on that mission. The room seemed to tilt. But he didn't. No. The general looked at the photograph again. Your father was supposed to be dead. A chill traveled down my arms. What happened in 1993? Hale hesitated. Then he said the words that changed everything. Your father discovered that someone inside our own command was selling classified technology. I stared at him. And the night he supposedly died, Daniel told me he knew who it was. Before I could respond, someone knocked on the locked door. 3 slow knocks. General Hale froze. Then a man's voice came through the door. General. Is Claire Mercer in there? Hale's expression hardened. I whispered, who is that? He closed my father's file. Someone who should never have heard your name. General Hale didn't open the door. Instead, he shoved my father's file back into the secure cabinet. Listen carefully, he whispered. The knocking came again. General Hale. I recognized the voice now. Deputy Director Raymond Voss. I'd met him that morning. Voss was in his late 60s, calm, polished, and almost grandfatherly. He'd shaken my hand and welcomed me to Washington. Now General Hale looked as though Voss were holding a loaded gun. Do not tell him what we discussed, Hale said. Why? Because Raymond Voss was assigned to Daniel's program in 1993. My blood turned cold. The general opened the door. Voss smiled. There you are. His eyes moved from Hale to me. I heard the briefing ended early. Scheduling conflict, Hale replied. Voss's smile didn't change. Of course. Then he looked at me. Ms. Mercer, may I ask you something? Sure. Your surname. Is Mercer your married name? No. Something flickered behind his eyes. Family name. Yes. Interesting. General Hale stepped between us. Raymond. Voss lifted his hands. Just making conversation. He walked away. Only after the hallway door closed did Hale breathe normally again. You need to leave Washington. I stared at him. You've just told me my father was secretly declared dead before I was born, and now you want me to go home. I want you alive. Then tell me what happened. Hale studied me. Perhaps he saw my father in my expression. Because eventually he sighed. Daniel's last mission was called Nightglass. The operation involved an experimental navigation platform designed to allow aircraft to operate when conventional satellite guidance was unavailable. It was revolutionary technology for its time. Only 12 people knew the complete design. Then pieces of it began appearing overseas. Someone was leaking information. My father discovered the leak. He believed he did.
Who?
I don't know. Do you think it was Voss? Hale paused. I think your father suspected him. My heart hammered. What happened during Night Glass? Daniel's aircraft disappeared over the Atlantic. No wreckage. Pieces. Enough to convince everyone. And Dad? Officially dead. But somehow he came home. Not officially. Hale explained that 6 months after the crash, he'd received a postcard. No return address. No signature. Just 5 words. Tell Marcus I kept flying. I knew Daniel had written it, Hale said. But intelligence investigators told me grief was making me irrational. And you accepted that. I was 30 years old and had 2 children. I was warned that continuing to ask questions could end my career. There was shame in his voice. I stopped asking. That night I returned to my hotel. I should have packed. Instead, I called my mother. She answered after 4 rings. Claire. Mom, was Dad in the Air Force? Silence. That silence answered everything. Mom. Where are you? Washington. Oh, God. Her voice cracked. You need to come home. So you knew. Claire. You told me he was an engineer. He was. You told me he walked out on us. Another silence. Why? To protect you. I gripped the phone. From what? From the people who came looking for him. My anger vanished. What people? My mother began crying. I don't know who they were. Your father came home one night in 2009. He was terrified. I'd never seen him afraid before. I remembered that night. Rain against the windows. Dad pacing downstairs. Mom crying behind their bedroom door. The next morning, he was gone. He told me if anyone ever discovered he was alive, they would come after everyone connected to him, Mom continued. Did he say where he was going? No. Did he leave anything? She hesitated. Mom. There was a box. My heart stopped. What box? He made me promise never to give it to you unless someone from his old life found you. I stood. Someone did. My mother whispered something under her breath. Then she gave me instructions. The box wasn't at home. Dad had rented a bank safe deposit box under my mother's maiden name. The next morning I drove 3 hours to retrieve it. Inside were 3 objects. A military patch. A photograph. And an old cassette recorder. The photograph showed Dad standing beside 2 men. One was a young Marcus Hale. The other was Raymond Voss. On the back, Dad had written, "One of these men saved my life." Underneath, the other tried to end it. My hands shook as I pressed play on the recorder. Static filled the tiny speaker. Then I heard my father's voice. Older than in the photographs. Exactly as I remembered him. Claire, if you're hearing this, then I failed to keep the past away from you. I covered my mouth. I'm sorry. For 14 years I'd imagined what I would say if I heard Dad's voice again. Now I couldn't breathe. I need you to understand something. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. His voice cracked. I left because somebody found me. Then came several seconds of static. The night glass leak never stopped. The man responsible built his career by burying what happened. I leaned closer. Dad continued. There's evidence. I hid it where only someone who knew me before night glass would understand. A pause. Then, ask Marcus where we first learned to fly without stars. The recording clicked off. I immediately called Hale. He answered on the second ring. I repeated Dad's message. For several seconds, the general said nothing. Then, I know where it is. Where? Arizona. What's in Arizona? The place your father and I nearly died when we were 24. Before I could ask anything else, Hale said, Claire, don't go back to your hotel. Why? Because Voss just requested access to every record connected to you. My skin prickled. Then I heard another sound. Not through the phone. Behind me. A car door closing. I turned. A black SUV had pulled into the bank parking lot. 2 men stepped out. Hale shouted through the phone. Claire. The men started walking toward me. Claire, get out of there. I grabbed the box. And ran. 24 hours later, General Hale and I were standing inside an abandoned training facility in the Arizona desert. Getting there had required favors I didn't understand and transportation I wasn't allowed to ask about. Hale led me through a deteriorating hangar. This is where Daniel and I trained before night class. Sunlight cut through holes in the roof. Old markings remained on the concrete. I looked around. Where did you learn to fly without stars? Hale pointed toward an old simulator room. There. Inside stood rusted equipment and dusty consoles. For 20 minutes, we found nothing. Then I noticed something carved beneath a metal desk. A symbol. The same symbol I'd seen on the engineering diagram. Dad's symbol. I knelt. Behind the desk was a loose metal plate. Hale removed it. Inside the wall sat a weatherproof container. The general stared at it. He knew someone would eventually come. Inside were documents, photographs, and a small data drive. But there was something else. An envelope. On the front. Claire. I tore it open. Sweetheart. If you're reading this, you're old enough to know that your father was not the man history says he was. My eyes blurred. I made mistakes. I trusted people I shouldn't have trusted. But I never betrayed my country, and I never abandoned you. I stopped reading. For years, those words had been the wound I'd carried everywhere. He abandoned you. Suddenly that wound had a different name. Sacrifice. Hale placed a hand on my shoulder. Then his phone rang. He answered. His expression changed immediately. What? He put the call on speaker. A federal investigator spoke. General, Voss has reported you for unauthorized removal of classified material. Security teams are searching for you and Ms. Mercer. Hale looked at the drive. He knows. A vehicle engine sounded outside. Then another. Hale walked to the window. Dust rose beyond the hangar. 3 SUVs. We're out of time. The doors opened. Men entered. And behind them came Raymond Voss. He looked almost disappointed. Marcus. Hale stepped in front of me. Raymond. Voss glanced at the container. 33 years, he said. Daniel always was stubborn. My pulse hammered. You knew my father survived. Voss looked at me. I suspected. You hunted him. I protected national security. You destroyed his life. Voss sighed. Your father was going to expose an operation he didn't understand. You sold night glass. For the first time, his smile disappeared. You think nations survive because everyone follows the rules. Hale's voice hardened. You admitted it. Voss laughed. To whom? I raised Dad's recorder. A tiny red light was glowing. Recording. Voss stared at it. Then smiled again. You think that matters? No, I said. I think this does. I held up the data drive. Voss's expression changed. Dad's files contained more than allegations. Payment records. Communications. Original night glass technical documents. Names. Dates. Accounts. 33 years of evidence. Hale had already transmitted copies before Voss arrived. Voss looked toward his security team. But they weren't moving. One man removed his earpiece. Sir, he said quietly, we've received orders to detain you. Voss stared at him. What? Step away from Ms. Mercer. For the first time since I'd met him, Raymond Voss looked old. Hale stepped aside. 2 agents approached. As they placed Voss in restraints, he looked at me. Your father destroyed his life for nothing. I shook my head. No. I held Dad's letter against my chest. He destroyed your lie. Voss was taken outside. The desert became quiet again. But one question remained. General. Hale turned. Is my father alive? He looked down. We don't know. I opened the final page of Dad's letter. There was one sentence I hadn't read. If Marcus is standing beside you when you read this, tell him I was right about one thing. I handed the letter to Hale. His eyes moved across the sentence. Then he laughed softly. What? I asked. Hale looked toward the desert sky. Your father and I had an argument before our last flight. About what? Whether a person could disappear completely. I looked back at the letter. Beneath the sentence was another line, written smaller than the rest. You can't disappear from the people who remember you. 3 months later, the government quietly corrected Daniel Mercer's service record. The details of Night Glass remained classified. Raymond Voss faced federal charges connected to espionage, obstruction, and the destruction of government records. General Hale retired the following spring. And me. I finally learned who my father had been. Pilot. Engineer. Whistleblower. Fugitive. Dad. But the story didn't end in Arizona. Because 6 months after Voss's arrest, I came home from work and found an envelope inside my mailbox. There was no stamp. No return address. Inside was a photograph. It showed an old airfield somewhere I didn't recognize. On the back were 6 handwritten words. You grew up well, little bird. My knees nearly gave out. There was only one person who had ever called me that. Dad. Below the message was a date. And a set of coordinates. The date was 3 weeks away. I called Marcus Hale. He answered immediately. Claire. I stared at the coordinates. General. What happened? I smiled through tears. I think my father wants to come home. There was a long silence. Then Hale said, Tell me where we're going. I grabbed my coat. For 33 years, the government had considered Captain Daniel Mercer a dead man. For 17 years, I'd believed my father had abandoned me. Both stories were lies. And somewhere beyond those coordinates was the only man who could finally tell us the truth. This time, I wasn't going to let him disappear.